Alright guys, so today I want to go over with you how to make hollow forms. There's a couple of different ways you can do this, and I'm going to show you two of them. Supplies you're going to need are obviously your clay. You will need newspaper. You will need a serrated rib for scoring. You will need a wooden rib for smoothing. You might need the paddle. You need slip, and you're going to need something that you can poke a hole in your piece, okay? You can use a needle tool, you can use a paintbrush handle, and I'll go over that in a moment. So what I have here, the first method I'm going to show you is the pinch pot method. I have two pinch pots here that are roughly the same size, okay? I've made these in advance. And what I'm going to do is, before I begin anything else, I'm going to take some newspaper and ball it up. And what I'm going to do is stuff my two halves, my two pinch pots, with newspaper, okay? While I'm creating my form and building my sculpture, this newspaper will support the clay from the inside so that it doesn't collapse on me while I'm working on it. And what I'll be doing is taking these two halves and putting them together, okay, to create a ball. A hollow ball, because remember, nothing can be more than 1 inch thick. So when I put my two halves together, I want to make sure I slip and score, or score and slip rather. Score and slip. And I'm pulling the newspaper out of the way so that I don't get it trapped in between my two halves of clay. Okay, and then I'll apply slip to these two. Okay. And I'm gonna put my two halves together and push them together. Try to get those edges aligned as best I can. Push them, and I'm going to give them a little wiggle to lock them in. Okay? Now obviously this is not a pretty thing right now. I need to smooth out this seam. There's a lot of slip on it at the moment, so what I'm going to use is a rib. And I'm smoothing across that seam. I'm pulling back and forth, pulling clay from both sides across that seam to close it up. And make sure there's friction. If there's too much slip, you're not going to get a lot of friction. You're not actually going to move the clay around very much. And you need to make sure that you are actually pulling clay from one side to the other. If you feel like you're not actually moving the clay around very much, you can take a serrated rib to start, and that does help to distribute that clay a little more. And then follow, you can see it's very textured now, and then follow with that wooden rib to help get that clay where you want it to be. And I'm going to keep going around and smoothing until the seam is closed up. Making sure I go back and forth over that seam. Back and forth, across that seam till it's all closed up. Okay? And now at least the two pieces are joined, but my seam's still showing a little bit there. Let me smooth that out. You can also use your hand if you prefer, whatever works best for you. Okay, so now it's got these kind of lumpy parts up top, and it's flat right here, which is not what I want. So once I've got it joined together, what I'm going to use to shape it is actually the paddle. Now you wouldn't think that you use a flat paddle to shape a round object, but it totally works. As long as you always move the object around and you start working out those lumps and bumps. What might happen is while you're paddling, it might open up that seam. That's okay. You can just close it right back up again and then continue paddling. And remember, the newspaper inside, the newspaper is supporting the clay so that while I'm working with this ball, it doesn't just collapse. So that looks a little bit better. I could continue to pat it. You can also just use the palm of your hand, whatever you need to do in order to get it into a ball shape. And from here I could start adding details. I could turn this into any number of things. And I'll go through some examples of how you can use a hollow ball or a hollow shape to create things like to create any kind of hollow form. Piggy banks, almost anything that is sort of roundish. I could always sort of push this and shape it into more of an egg shape if I wanted to. These are very versatile. There's another way to hollow stuff out too. Maybe you have a shape like this that is, it's a solid shape and it's a very specific shape. I've sculpted a little heart here, but this is too thick. It's more than 1 inch thick. So I need to hollow this out, okay? So in order to do that, it's a very similar process, but I don't want to damage the shape of this too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a fettling knife and I'm going to cut right through the middle of this heart. Okay, ooh, look at those air bubbles. Look at that. So this is one of the reasons you want to hollow things out. You may have trapped air inside while you were sculpting it. So what you're going to do in order to hollow it out is take a loop tool. Okay, it's got the loop on the end of it. You take a loop tool and you scoop the clay out of the middle, making sure not to go through the edge, leaving a nice edge around here, and making sure you're scooping out the depth of the clay as well. Not only a flat surface, I need to scoop out going down to make sure that my walls are an even thickness all the way around. Now, you don't have to worry too much about the inside of this being pretty. It's going to be hollow. No one's going to see the inside. But you're just removing excess clay so that it's not too heavy and you're not trapping air, and so that it can dry evenly. Okay, and I'm going to scoop out the other half. So if you have a form that's too thick, too heavy, and needs to be hollowed out, this is an easy way to do it. Okay, so now this looks very similar to my pinch pot from before, except it's still the heart shape. So then I would follow the exact same procedure. Stuff the two halves with newspaper. Okay, I just need a very small amount because this is not nearly as big as my ball from earlier. And then I would score and slip and put those two halves together, and I still have my heart shape, but now it's a hollow form. Okay, score and slip, smear, make it one solid piece. Okay, that's the same concept. So both of these, once they're put together, they're a hollow shape. So what they have is air inside, and as we all know, having air inside is a bad thing. If you do not put a hole in this to let the air out, guess what? It's going to blow up, okay? So what we do is we add what's called a vent hole to vent the air. Now you can take something as small as a needle tool and poke a hole through it. Make sure you seal that newspaper, and that's plenty. The only thing that has to move out of it is air. Okay, so it doesn't need to be a big hole. Here's the problem with using just a needle tool though. if I'm continuing to work on this and I am smearing and smoothing and I happen to close this thing up without realizing it, I'm going to lose my vent hole. Okay, when it's a tiny little hole, it's possible to close it up, maybe some slip gets in there, and then your vent hole is gone. So I prefer to take something a little bit bigger, this is a paintbrush handle, and put that through. That's much less likely to get covered up. If you think you can be careful and use a needle tool, great. Otherwise, go with a paintbrush handle. Make sure that this hole is hidden. Okay, this should be somewhere on your project where it's not going to be seen. Maybe on the bottom, okay? Maybe tucked under some kind of detail where it's not going to be seen. This is not a feature that you want to show your viewer, okay? This is a technical thing you have to have, but it's not something you want to highlight on your project. So that's how to make hollow forms. I'll follow up here with some examples of ways you can use it. Again, you can make piggy banks, sculptures, all kinds of good stuff. So I'll show you some hollow form examples, and I hope to see you using this in the future.